So it is my pleasure this morning to introduce our guest speaker this morning, and some of us do know her from being our co-pastor years in the last year, a couple of years ago. And it is truly a pleasure and a delight for her to be here this morning. Some of you may or may not know that she's had to triumph over a little incident, but we are so grateful that she's here. Vicki has been a voice of peace and calm and love and joy, and so it's just truly my honor and privilege to introduce her and welcome her back to our stage for her to deliver her message, and so we are so grateful. And she's going to get a little assistance coming up, and
Here we go. All right. Thank you, love. So I'm going to stand here for just a moment and invite you to stand and affirm with me. I am healed, whole, and healthy. Together. I am healed, whole, and healthy. Now, if there's anything going on in your body today, know that you've just affirmed it is on its way for perfect healing. Let's say it one more time. I am healed, whole, and healthy. Thank you, God. Okay. Well, I want to thank you all for all the wonderful cards and text messages and words of inspiration, and hang in there. The encouragement has been great. Just 4 weeks ago, I did have a little whoops, pulled off a ledge by one of my dogs that when I went home looked like a horse. I am telling you, it's amazing how these dogs get bigger after you've had an accident with them. But anyway, I had a great surgeon, had a partial hip replacement, a couple of bones, and a plate in my arm. And it was my first experience of ever breaking a bone, so I had no idea that our bones really are so important to our bodies. You know, all the red blood cells are manufactured within the bones. And so to really be healthy, we have to heal these bones. Great doctors, great medical professionals, and I ran up against 3 people who became my Charlie's Angels, if you remember that TV series, way back when. I had a nurse practitioner, occupational therapist, and a physical therapist, and they did nothing but say, you can do it. And so I did. 2 days or a day and a half after surgery on my feet. Those of you who've had hip replacements know you've got to move the body. You've got to be able to start getting those muscles working, and the tendons, everything has to start working again. So it's a great time to just affirm the magnificence of our bodies. Just affirm it. Those of you who have been through major healings know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't had a major healing, you might in your lifetime experience it. Just be ready and prepared. At the moment of impact, after I fell off a ledge with my dog, I realized I couldn't get up. And I remembered saying, I am healed, whole, and healthy. And I started this journey with a spiritual perspective. And I will tell you, the benefit of being on the spiritual journey is that you need your body, your mind, and your spirit all working together so that there's no complaints, there's no problem. Everything is all about perfect healing. So I'm just throwing that out to you in the instance that you have a whoops surprise just like me. So I wanted to keep this divine appointment today. Richard's in Wichita talking with the minister and the board and having a great time there. I wasn't quite sure I could make it today, but thank you for all the support. Lynn and Tom have been my major transporters looking after me today, and those of you helping me, Maureen and Armin, thank you. It's just so great to have a spiritual community that cares about one another. I would say that the divine appointment today was for me because I wanted to speak about two people who have really been major influences on my life, and because I've been laid up for a while, I've been able to think about them more dearly. More dearly. Those two people are Carl Jung and Charles Fillmore. I'm calling them like-minded mystics because mysticism is all about being in the direct path of experiencing the divine in your life. It is direct intuition, it's a voice, it's an inner voice, an inner calling, a response on your part, on my part. It's deeper than, it's just deeper. What can I say? It's a deeper knowing, a deeper understanding, and when it happens, you're not quite sure, but eventually there's a recognition, an inner recognition. And you're on that path, and it's a mystical path. It's like a plant being sustained and nourished with water and sunlight. And it just doesn't want to leave that place. It grows and evolves from that place. You and I feel the same when we are in the presence of the divine. You know, the Christian tradition is, for our mystics, is that in the past there were monasteries, they were sequestered. John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, even Thomas Merton, Maestro Eckhart, they all came out of monasteries. But modern day mystics are in the world but not of the world. They're active. They're stepping into the fire of what is theirs to do, and they have a purpose and a plan, and they are so important to us to recognize because they show us what it's like to really live a life of purpose. Really live it. And we can learn a lot. These are people like Martin Luther King Jr., Dag Hammarskjöld from the UN, Andrew Cohen, Matthew Fox, Mother Teresa. These are people that you know their lives were serving a greater cause, and they were also in the fire at the same time, but they were of the heart. And so it wasn't that they were consumed by it, they were energized by it. So we look at mystics as being awakened beings, ready to experience the divine. You and I don't need to be a monk or a nun or a sage. We can be and experience that mystical moment with the divine as we can, as we're ready to just move beyond form and material world and affirm, I'm in this presence. I'm in a presence of something deeper, and it's true. It's happening. It's really happening. So it's a mystery. The mystics just know how to stand in the glory and the gory of all life experiences and to affirm this is of the divine. They're fierce, but they nurture us. They show us how to live freely and how to incarnate in a co-creative relationship with Spirit, to walk and talk and be amongst the world with a soft heart and yet taking responsibility for their spiritual journey. So why are these mystics so important? Why are we talking about Carl Jung and Charles Fillmore as mystics? Jung said this about the mystical tradition that we needed, that mystics are those that we owe the best in our humanity to. They're the ones that represent the best of us, their depth of caring and their depth of love and their ability to be so courageous and take a stand for what they believe is theirs to do. We need their inspiration. We need their heart. And without them, our lives may be rather meaningless and purposeless, because we are not seeing anything or anyone stepping forward to inspire us. So all of us need to know that we matter, don't we? And that's what our mystics help us understand, that we do matter. You matter, and I matter. And as we come together, we can make a difference. So one of our Unity ministers has done some in-depth research on Carl Jung and Charles Fillmore and the synchronicity of their lives together, in particular about dreams. And that's Reverend Russell Highland right here in Virginia at Unity of Fairfax. He studied them in his master's program, and he has seen how these two have come together in a synchronicity. It's not a coincidence that these two were studying and thinking the same thing and believing the same things at the same time. They were contemporaries within 20 years of one another. Charles Fillmore was 20 years older than Carl Jung. But both of them started asking these deeper questions, and both of them were willing to help pierce the veil of untruth, the split that's been in the Western world for thousands of years, that God is out there, rather than God is out there and within at the same time, and that this divinity is within us. Now, the Eastern traditions never lost that. But here in the West, we have had that split to occur. These men are helping us heal that. And so both of them agree that spirituality and psychology must come together to heal us in our religious forms and in our daily lives. Jung said this: "It is high time that the clergyman and the psychotherapist to join forces to meet this great spiritual task, leading individuals to reclaim their religious outlook." With churches closing and the demise of the Christian tradition throughout the United States and in Europe now, you can see that Carl Jung is coming from a deeper place of saying we've got to really look at how we serve, how we speak together, how we worship, and how we think about God and Jesus, the Christ, and our divine selves within. Now, a critic once said to Charles Fillmore, "Your religion is psychology instead of Christianity." How about that? And that was back in 1939. So Charles had just come out with his statement of beliefs, and people were looking at the divine within and the concept of his concept of God. And so Charles Fillmore said this: "The New Thought Christianity includes an understanding of psychology, but does not stop with an analysis of the mind. It goes on to the highest phase of the mind's possibility, unity with spirit." And so if we think about psychology, it was limited at first just to physical behaviors and responses, emotional responses, and thought responses, was not linked to the divine. And Carl Jung changed that. So I want to give you a biography real quickly of both Charles and Carl. Now I'm on a first-name basis with both of them. And they're so fascinating. These are great minds. I am in dismay. I would like to think, I've studied them. I have been a part of Jungian seminars. I have visited several occasions with a Jungian psychiatrist. I understand the Fillmore's works, and yet I'm still such a baby when it comes to really, truly understanding the depth of what they knew. But I will say this: they're on the right track, because every time I think of what they've done, something in me just bubbles up. I just know. I just feel it. And because of that, it's like the divine is affirming it within me. Yes, yes, listen to these men. So let me tell you a little bit about Charles. He was born in a log cabin in 1854 on the Chippewa Indian Reservation. Now, his father was an Indian agent, and his mother raised Charles and his brother Norton. But it was interesting that on 2 occasions, the Chippewa Indians came and abducted Charles from the cabin, took him away several hours, and brought him back unscathed. But it's just interesting that was that interaction between him and those on the Indian reservation. Eventually, Charles's father drifted away. His brother Norton ran away. And Charles was left at home with his mother at age 10, and he had a bad ice skating incident. In fact, having broken a bone, I will tell you the pain involved when it shatters. This man had none of the support of the medical professionals, and he had many, many doctors whom he called quacks, and after he was 18 years or so, he had a difference in 3.5 inches in one leg and the other. In fact, he was given a sentence of like he could live to 40 years old, but after that they weren't quite sure because of the abscesses on his legs. So this man endured great pain, and yet he endured. He was able to complete his high school education. He was tutored. He did go to school, but he was primarily self-motivated. He was so precocious. And at the age of 20, he left home, went to Texas and to Colorado. He worked on the railroad. He worked in a mining industry, and eventually met the love of his life, Myrtle. And the two of them married. When they did, Myrtle had a family history of tuberculosis, and she had been given a life sentence and a fatal diagnosis by her doctors if she could not heal this tuberculosis. So the two of them together set out looking for healers, and finally they went to hear a lecture by E.B. Weeks, a Christian Science practitioner, and he said the words, "I do not accept sickness." And when that hit her soul, it didn't hit Charles the same way, but when it hit her soul, she heard that response, "I do not inherit sickness. I'm a child of God." And she went home, and within 9 months to 2 years, she healed that tuberculosis. And from that, Charles had a spiritual awakening, and this whole movement was based on healing and wholeness that Myrtle experienced. She had a direct experience. She would pray to her body. She would talk to the cells in her body. And as they responded, she had a total healing. Well, this just set Charles ablaze with this understanding that the body heals and that there is a source within affirming that healing and wholeness with her. And so the consequences of that, after her healing, Unity Worldwide received articles and books published by Charles and Myrtle, and eventually they created Silent Unity, which is the 24-hour prayer service, and this whole movement was set into motion that you and I experience today. Charles wanted to understand more of this indwelling divine, and he said this, because his leg wasn't healing. He said, "I will go to headquarters. If I am spirit, and this God they talk about so much is spirit, we can somehow communicate, or the whole thing is a fraud." So he used to every day, or probably in the evenings, have this special time of meditation. And on his own, he began the healing process, but it wasn't happening quick enough. He realized that through his dreams, he was able to communicate with spirit, and that's how the healing happened for him. Later on in life, he only needed a 1-inch lift on one of his shoes. So the healing did happen for Charles, and it wasn't a fraud. And he came to that realization. So by the age of 94, Charles passed away, and that was in 1948. Now, Carl Jung comes along. He's born in Switzerland in 1875, 20 years after Charles was born. And we know much more about Jung because he wrote an autobiography. If you've ever read Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, he goes into great depth of his inner journey. And what we know about him is that he was the son of a minister, and that there were many ministers in his family circle. But in retrospect, Jung says he lived a sad life. His parents had marital difficulties. And what he witnessed of his father was unfulfilled in his church, and Charles did not relate to any of the rituals in the church setting. He thought they were shallow. And what he did was develop instead an inner journey based on connecting with his inner mind, his spirit, and his body. Later on in life, he went through school, he became a doctor, then became a psychiatrist, and he studied schizophrenia and the effects of mental illness, and he was published and became very prominent in Zurich. Eventually he married a woman named Emma Rauschenbach and had 5 children. So on this rise, he begins to be introduced to people, and lo and behold, he's introduced to Sigmund Freud. And their connection was very special to him. They were studying the psychology of the mind, which was just burgeoning around the early 1900s, and Freud was studying the libido and sexuality. What happened to Carl Jung was that he said, I cannot go along with that. There is no connection outside of the behaviors or the thoughts of an individual. And he said there's no connection whatsoever to the divine essence, the creative process, the creative spirit within one. And so when he challenged Freud, Freud cut him off personally and professionally, as well as did the whole psychological community in that area. And for the time being, Jung experienced such a troubled time. His relationship had been built on with these people. And so, again, he had to go deep within, and he had to affirm what it was. It took him deeper and deeper and deeper. And as he did, he began to formulate theories that went beyond anything of that day. The school that he founded was called Analytical Psychology, and it emphasized the human quest for wholeness. Now, this is in the early 1900s. This is just unbelievable, but the goal was to accept oneself totally, consciously, and get in touch with the unconscious so that there was an integration of all aspects of oneself that would be coming up for healing. He called that process individuation, a pathway to the divine, experiencing the divine within. And now his psychological structure is still well accepted within psychological circles for healing and wholeness. Many of you are familiar with the Myers-Briggs. He formulated those early personality types. He compared Eastern and Western religions, and he went on to travel extensively around the world. He died in 1961, which is not that too far away from us. So we have this huge intellectual as well as Charles Fillmore formulating the theological, we have the psychological. Both of them contributed to piercing the veil of untruth, where both recognize the divine is within. The divine is just not in creation. There is creation going on within you and me. And Carl Jung called it the divine self, and Charles Fillmore called it the Christ self, or the Christ consciousness. But both of these men offered breakthroughs in Western thought that had not occurred in Eastern thought, where they still respected and understood the indwelling divinity. So it's in this healing that we can hear this quote: "The spiritual path of the West is incarnation, not transcendence. To fully embody God within, living in conscious relationship to God within, is our psychological and spiritual work." So we don't need to just sit off in a room somewhere and meditate. Rather, we're here to experience spirit within us and to have this way of walking and talking with spirit and listening as much as we can so that we can understand this divine, the work of the divine is happening within us all the time. So here are 4 areas in which these 2 men were in agreement. And I hope I do them justice by saying these areas. Both affirmed the existence of God, the existence of universal spirit, and the divine within. Call it the self or call it the Christ, is a real living presence, and we can experience it. We can experience it. We don't just pray to it. We're in it. We're in the soup. The second thing is that both of those believe that there is a purpose to life and that we can grow and evolve with this spirit, this love, into our greater wholeness and health. And know, bring it alive in everything that we do so that we're listening intently to messages coming to us, the voice of spirit, the voice of prosperity, the voice of love, the voice of finding the right solution and the right decisions, being wise in what we do and what we say. So both believed this third area of incarnation, that as Jesus the Christ incarnated into that Christ mind, you and I can do the same. Now, it might not stay long. It might just be an occurrence once that we have experienced it, or it might be more. But we have that potential within us to stay and be nourished and abide in that consciousness as the I am Christ Spirit. And the last thing, and this really points to the synchronicity of the times, that both Jung and Fillmore believed in the power of dreams to help us be happy and healthy, because the unconscious mind, you can say in God mind, universal spirit, in the unconscious, all these symbols and patterns are erupting into these bizarre dreams, spectacular dreams that we have. And they're getting our attention so that we will bring them into our daily lives and heal, or know, or wake up to something, or take some action on something else. But the dreams are there for a purpose. And the dream work that I've done in the last several years has just been phenomenal. It's been exciting, and it's been rewarding to hear other people's dreams that are coming up and that are comforting and that are reassuring and are also providing wise counsel. So these are the things I wanted to share with you today. I know I've taken a little bit longer, but I really wanted you to know that on your spiritual journey, you have the opportunity to have direct experiences, to stand in the path of being in your ordinary life and knowing that the divine is at work within you, always to provide inspiration, guidance, wisdom, and counsel. So I hope that today's sharing that I've brought to you will encourage you. If you have further comments, please contact me. I'm not walking very far these days, so I'm here for you, and I bless you. Thank you for letting me keep this divine appointment.